Hi everybody, it's Miss Bond here again. We want to start to move a little bit more in talking about the analyzing of arguments, where we're going to be moving from just reading them to actually writing them as well. Now, we've been talking a lot about argument in the general sense because we've been focusing though on the rhetorical appeals and how they've been written. And we're definitely going to keep talking about all that stuff, but we're going to also be looking a little bit more closely at argument, what it is, what an argument's claim is, what evidence is there to support it, as well as its organization. It's important to think about what argument actually is, however. Is an argument just conflict? Is it a contest between two opposing forces, the good and the bad, the evil, and is it triumphing over the good? Is it some type of battle around words, or can we think about argument as being some type of process of reasoned inquiry and rational discourse seeking common ground? Now, I know some of you are saying, what in the world are you talking about, Ms. Bond? I really have no idea. So we know that a process is something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's some type of movement that's happening. So it's not just people who are talking about one thing and then that's it. There has to be something that there's a process that's going through. And then we think about reasoned inquiry, and we already talked about what reasoning is. But let's think about it this way and think about it as being a thinking process. An inquiry is pretty much the same thing, looking closely at something. And obviously, something that is rational is something that's well thought out. And good old discourse, a conversation. Now, sometimes this conversation is going to be two-sided, and other times it may just be one person or one group who is engaging in the discourse or the conversation. But with the idea that there is someone or something, some idea that is on the opposite end. The idea, though, is that there is some type of common ground that's taking place, that there is some conclusion that's drawn as a result of that argument. Now, this seems like a pretty reasonable way of thinking about argument, but to be honest, that's not typically what happens when we talk about argument, and even rhetoric for that matter. Lots of times we have people who are just shouting at each other or interrupting each other and having really exaggerated claims and assertions, and they don't have a lot of support to support whatever it is that they are talking about, or they lack credibility to make them actually believable. And if you look at the cartoon that's in front of you, and you can call this crazed rhetoric, the political commentator Tom Tolles does this inside of his cartoon. This cartoon was something that came out a few days after the Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. You remember she got shot while she was at a community event, and she was almost killed by gunmen who did ultimately kill some other people, injured quite a few others during the process. 6 people were killed and 13 people were actually injured, to be exact. But a lot of people in American society, and you could probably say outside America, saw this tragedy as something that was a result from the type of really damaging political conversations that had been going on for quite some time, that had also had elements of violent language in it. And the way that this cartoon is written, basically Tolles is arguing that Uncle Sam our nice guy here, good old Uncle Sam, gotta love him, is in danger, because you're thinking about Uncle Sam as also being the good old USA, and how they are in danger, or the country, I should say, is in danger of being devoured by, you guessed it, crazed rhetoric, lion guy there. And then, there isn't something that the United States is going to be able to do. Like, there won't be another trick that they're going to be able to, put on for the American people, because they may end up getting swallowed whole by this crazed rhetoric. The language choices and the type of argumentation that they're constantly engaging in the political realm may in fact devour the United States as a whole, and then good old USA will be resting in peace. And we must make sure to put the eyes there, because it bothers me otherwise. Okay, so now we can think about Toll's argument as being exaggerated. Now, it's up to you which way you like to go, but as a result of that, we need to think about argument in a different way. Instead, let's think about argument as being a persuasive discourse that is coherent, meaning that it makes sense, and contains a considered movement from a claim to a conclusion. Our focus really is so that we can see argument as a means of better understanding other people's arguments as well as our own. And the stress there on other people's argument, because I think that many of us can attest to the fact that we believe someone or believe the position of someone a lot more if they've shown that they've done some research, that they've gone out and looked at things. And that's why we have an argument and discourse that is coherent, and that there's a true movement from both the claim as well as the conclusion. Now, we aren't the first people to think about it this way. Actually, the psychologist Carl Rogers came up with an argumentation style called the Rogerian argument that does exactly that, that looks at argument not necessarily as a contest between two opposing sides. It's not confrontational or adversarial, where one person is wrong and the other person is right. But when you think about it, what that does is forces people to be on the defense, and almost always results in some type of conflict, which is what we see, especially in the two-party political system that we're currently in. That was the first example that I came up with. But in the Rogerian argument, it's really a focus on seeing those people that you disagree with as colleagues, people who have thoughts and opinions that are to be valued. And really what you're trying to do is emphasize those points of agreement and then try to find common ground. Now, just to give you some guidelines of what Rogerian arguments kind of look like, typically you're going to be summarizing the opposing viewpoints, what the other side has established, and then carefully considering the position of those who disagree with you. What are their legitimate concerns? And if you were in their place, how would you actually react? What you do when you present your presentation or your argument is to also present the opposing viewpoints both accurately as well as fairly. And what this does is show that you respect the ideas of those people who disagree with you. And you can concede the strength of their compelling opposing argument. And remember, a concession is when you establish that you understand where the person is coming from. You acknowledge the fact that this person has a valid idea, not necessarily one that you agree with, but you accept the fact that they have this position. You also acknowledge the concerns that you and your opposition will actually share. But in doing so, you point out to your readers, your audience, how they will benefit from the position that you happen to have. And to make your argument the most compelling, you present evidence that supports your viewpoint. And ultimately, it's up to your reader and your audience to agree or disagree. But it won't be because you have such a stark contrast and have been giving a lot of negative commentary, but instead it's because they have established that you have a reasonable assertion and that your claim is one that's backed up by appropriate and timely evidence to support it, and then ultimately have your audience come away with the same idea that you do. Now, I mentioned the fact that you would have a claim. Now, what that looks like, however, is very different depending on what your argument actually happens to be. So let's talk about what it means to stake a claim. There are three different types or three different categories of claims, and we're going to talk about those for the next couple of minutes. But before we do that, it's important to understand what a claim actually is. A claim can be called a number of different things in addition to an assertion or a proposition. Now, a claim is different from just a topic, because a claim has to be something that has to be able to be argued. So it's not just a topic or a main idea, it's also a position that you're talking about. It can be an informed opinion, but it is something that is, once again, arguable. Keep in mind this idea about this claim being informed. You don't just come up with things. There has to, for a claim to be strong, there has to be some exploration that goes on. And that exploration can take on a number of different formats. Reading about it, discussing it with other people, brainstorming new ideas, taking notes based on information that you get, rethinking through the process. When you look at a topic and you are able to develop a position on it, then you can make that claim. And we'll look at an example of that right now. Okay, here's an example of a claim. So you have this topic that's on same-sex classrooms, and there are a couple of different directions that this could go in. Many schools have single-sex classrooms. Is this a claim? Not really. It's true, so we can get down with that, so there's some truth to that. But it's easily verified, and you can't argue with it. No argument there. Sorry about that sloppy writing, but, you know, it's all good. Okay, so there's no argument. So this is definitely not a claim. It's simply a topic. So we're just going to cross that out. The second, single-sex classrooms have been around for years, especially in private schools. Now, this has a lot more detail to it, but it's also fairly easy to verify whether or not this is true or not. So it's the same thing. Truth and not really arguable. So let's just cross that out too. Lastly, single-sex classrooms are ineffective because they do not prepare students for the realities of the workplace. Now, this is a claim because you can argue the mess out of this. Some people, as soon as you put in this idea of ineffectiveness, some people will say, yes, it is effective. Some people will say it's ineffective. And there's lots of wiggle room about how you could talk about this idea. And so this, in fact, is a claim. Now, if you need another example, just to solidify this into your brain, think about the mastery grading system. Same concept. Many schools have used mastery grading. True. You can look it up anywhere. You could say that it's been in use for decades, especially in elementary schools. Also true. You could say that mastery grading is mastery grading is a recent phenomenon in secondary as well as middle schools. Also a truth. You can't really argue with it. You get to a claim when you're basing it on some type of opinion. Mastery grading is the most effective way to show the depth of student knowledge in a classroom or a course. Ding, ding, ding. I know that some of you right now listening to this are saying, oh, no, it doesn't. And as soon as there is a point of argument that could happen, you have yourself a claim. Okay, so we know that claims are things that have to be arguable. And so there are three major types of claims that I mentioned before. The first is a claim of fact. Second is claim of value. And the third is a claim of policy. And we're going to go through each one of them. And don't worry, we're going to be doing lots of activities. Well, we'll be doing some activities that will help you in class to better understand all this. So bring your questions to class if something is not clear to you. So let's move on to claims of fact. Okay, claims of fact assert that something is either true or not true. You can't really argue with something like Zimbabwe is in Africa, or whether the restaurants on Main Street serve more customers at breakfast than at lunch, because you can easily figure out those types of things. Easily resolved, easily verified. You could find that information out fairly quickly. Find out a country, you just look up something on a map. The second, you can just look at observation to see which restaurants are more crowded at what time of the day. Now, what you can argue, though, is that a country like Zimbabwe has an unstable government, or that the restaurants on Main Street are more popular with older people than with younger ones. You can figure that one out. Because you're like, well, what does unstable mean? And what does popular mean? And who's older? Because some of you would say that I'm older, but I would say that my people in my parents' age bracket are older. So those are matters of opinion. Arguments of fact are based on what exactly is factual. And I put that in quotation marks for a reason, because someone would say that it's a fact that the Social Security program will go bankrupt in the year 2025. We've heard that numerous times, especially in the most recent presidential election. But really, that's a matter of interpretation. Some people would say that, what they would argue, well, what does Social Security look like then versus now, and speaking in the future? Yeah, it just might. Some people would talk about that elements of Social Security would go bankrupt, but not all. And so there's different ways of talking about that. And so that's why it's a claim of fact. Sometimes people will say, or has said in the past, that cell phones increase the incidence of brain tumors. That's arguable, because that was a claim that was made in the late 20th century, but has been disputed in the early part of the 21st century, because what happens sometimes in claims of fact, new facts can call into question old facts. Something that was true 30 years ago is not necessarily true now. And to bring up a point about it opens yourself up for argument. Another concept when we think about claims of fact, how about that women are more talkative than men? Claims of fact always, I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that type of language. Claims of fact often challenge stereotypes or social beliefs, because in actuality, in observation, men can talk just as much, and sometimes longer, than women. It just depends on the context. If you've ever sat in any classroom that, for whatever reason, had some lag time, and somehow or another, the conversation moved to a football team or basketball team, oh my goodness, we know that young men can talk just as much, if not more, as young ladies about whatever fashion trend or television show that they happen to see. So I would definitely say that men talk just as much as women do. It just depends on what they're talking about. But you see, that's an argument. We could go back and forth about something like that. The second is this idea of a claim of value. Now, a claim of value is probably one of the most common types because it argues whether something is good or bad, right or wrong, desirable or undesirable. Claims of value can be personal judgments based on taste, or they could be more objective evaluations that are based on some type of external criteria. When we think about something that's based on taste, something that we could say is that Brad Pitt is the best leading man in Hollywood. Now, some of you just looking at that or hearing his name is like, psh, whatever. Brad Pitt is definitely not the best leading man in Hollywood. You might have a whole bunch of other people. I would love to say that Denzel Washington is the best leading man in Hollywood. He's good. He really is good. But I digress. You may have someone else that you think is the best leading man in Hollywood, and that's just based on you. It's strictly personal. However, another person would argue that even if you happen to say that Brad Pitt, is the best leading man in Hollywood, Leonardo DiCaprio is more highly paid in his movies, and so and also his movies tend to make much more money than Brad Pitt does. So then you're basing that opinion not on just personal taste, but actually on external criteria. All you have to look at is box office figures, as well as looking at some magazine or published scenario that gives you dollar figures for how much money he made. You can make the same statement about any singer that you like. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good singer right now, but for the life of me, the person is not coming to my head. But we could say that Tweet, who's like old for your standards, I'm sure, is one of the best vocalists in R&B. But we could also say that even though that might be true, and that's a might on that, stressing that might, Beyonce is more highly paid than Tweet and has sold way more records than she has. And so that value is based on some type of external criteria. Now, when you're making an argument based on a claim of value, you have to make sure that you establish that specific criteria or standards that show to what extent the subject meets your standards. Like, what is it that you're talking about? If you're saying best, what does that mean? If you're saying good, what does that mean? So when you have a value like good, then you also have to establish what that actually means. And it needs to be very clear, because good can mean one thing to one person and good can mean something completely different to someone else. So you have to make sure that you're establishing what good actually means. If you think about those types of reviews for television shows or albums or concerts or books, those are based on claims of value. They have an establishment of what is good or what is bad, what is in good taste, what is in bad taste. And then after that, there are elements that you are establishing to either support or disagree with that idea. And don't worry, we're going to be working with stuff that has claims of value in it. So just want to make sure you know what a claim of value is. And lastly, and I know some of you are saying, finally. But remember, you can stop me at any time and, go back and do something else and all that jazz. And hopefully also you will be revisiting these at the portions that you need to review it. So, anywho, the last is claims of policy. And claims of policy occur when some type of change is proposed. You can see these on a local level where, our school is trying to raise money to contribute to some school that they're trying to help or build on. You want your parents to let you spend more time with your friends out on the weekends or whatever. It could be something larger where you're thinking about proposing a transition to an alternative energy source. Or if you want to, the political system is in the process of changing some type of copyright law for digital music, changing foreign policy. It may be a legislation that is in support of allowing felons to vote in certain elections. So when you think about it, when you're looking at an entire argument of policy, you're usually going to have all three of the claims in place. So you're going to usually begin with some type of definition of the problem, whatever that happens to be, and that's a claim of fact. This is what is the issue at hand. Then you're going to talk about why it's a problem. Now, that's something that definitely is a claim of value because some people would have a different opinion about that than others. And then finally, there's going to be an explanation of the change that needs to happen. And that is that claim of policy. Now, usually a claim of policy calls for some type of direct action to take place, say, for example, a changing of a law. But sometimes it could just be a recommendation for a change in an attitude or viewpoint. So some people, in making a claim of policy and thinking about alternative energy sources, it's not necessarily that they want you to go out and buy a solar panel to put on your roof right away, but they do want you to start to think about the fact that there are other ways of heating and cooling and running appliances and machinery in our everyday lives. And once people can make those types of shifts in their mindset, actions can then follow, and then after that, changes in actual legislation could happen. For example, some of us who have different viewpoints on how we live our lives, it's not necessarily that we want everyone to do what we do, but instead we want them to have a different thinking process or attitude when it comes to looking at people who are like me or like us, since we share that same common life experience. Okay, so finally, to put it all together, we talked about, by and large, this idea of argument and what it is. And we talked about the fact that it's not a back and forth to opposing ideas, but instead it's a discourse, a conversation. That does not look like discourse at all. Let's erase that and rewrite it again to make it look like something. So argument is a discourse. A little bit better. And one that is informed. We also talked about the fact that to do that, the best type of argument style is that of Rogerian. And so we're able to see opposing viewpoints. Come on, S, you can do it. Well, I think I get the idea that that's supposed to be an S. But you can't necessarily see that that's an N. Opposing viewpoints. Okay. Long, but hopefully over time I'll get better at this whole using this thing. Okay, so we also talked about the fact that in creating an argument, there has to be an establishment of a claim. And in that claim, there are 3 different types. There are claims of value. There are claims of, golly me, effect. I'm not having much luck with this writing thing today, but you get the idea. And then finally, claims of policy. Policy. Okay. Or something to that effect. My apologies, everybody. But no worries. You have the notes now, so you can watch them and read them and listen to them to your heart's content. I want you to come to class tomorrow with any questions that you have, and we are going to be doing some activities that deal with everything that we've been talking about. We'll probably break it up over a couple of days, though, but I want to make sure that we at least have an idea of what we're going to be talking about. All right, well, I'm all done. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me as well, because I'll be checking email regularly. If not, just bring them to class with you and have an open mind to delving into the world of argument. Okay, everyone. Miss Vine signing out.